Good afternoon, everyone. I welcome you to the Thermal Comfort, Indoor Air Quality and Ventilation for Occupants webinar. I am Yashima Jain and I'll be moderating today's webinar session. This is the fourth technical session of the 10-part series, and we hope that you have got a chance to review the self-learning module on today's topic. Next slide, please. Before we begin, I would like to acknowledge the support of our sponsors and affiliates. Next. So today's session is being conducted by Dr. Yash Shukla. He is the technical director for the energy systems at Center for Advanced Research in Building Science and Energy. He has more than 15 years of international experience in building energy efficiency research and serves as a lead on several energy efficiency research projects at CARBS. He has extensive experience in building management systems, building energy analysis, HVAC system operation, building simulation modeling, and energy efficiency control algorithms. Dr. Yash, we welcome you to the webinar today.
Thank you, Yashima, for the kind introduction.
Yep. So before we begin into the session, here are a few announcements that I would like to make. First, we will have a special webinar on October 24th on the Climate Studio software. This webinar will be conducted by the authors of the software who are also faculties at universities in the US. Now, the webinar will explore the use of simulation capabilities of Climate Studio to get to a net zero energy building. The second announcement for today is, so your deliverable is due on October 12th, which is the coming Monday. We are excited to see your project and team summaries. Now, team leaders will submit the deliverable reports on the same learning platform where you view the learning modules each week. Tomorrow, we will send an email to the team leaders about the details for the submission. Now, remember, we would not accept any submissions beyond 5 p.m. on Monday. And with that, let's get started now. Dr. Yash intends to talk to you about how implementing the best practices of thermal comfort, IAQ, and ventilation can help you towards designing healthy, comfortable net zero buildings. As always, you are free to send in your questions at any time during the session, and we will take the questions as time allows during the session and provide answers to the unanswered questions after the webinar. And with that, it's over to you, Dr. Yash.
Thank you, Yashima, for the kind introduction and announcing the deadline before the presentation, so everybody pays attention. So I am going to talk about, as Yashima mentioned, on thermal comfort, indoor air quality, and ventilation for occupants. But I'm not going to talk a lot about the theories because you might have studied a lot in the self-learning module. You must have read it. So my presentation will be focused on application of theories using an example of a building which is located at CEPT University. It's a net zero energy building, and you can see a picture of that on the screen right now. So with that, I start the presentation. What is a thermal comfort? As you might have read in the self-learning module, it's a condition of mind that expresses satisfaction with thermal environment, and it's a subjective evaluation. So it's a very, very important to understand that it's actually a subjective evaluation and depends on many factors that ultimately determines thermal comfort in buildings. There are three main areas in which you can divide the factors that affect thermal comfort, and you might have studied them again in your self-learning module. So the first aspect is a personal factors. So this is where there are two factors in the personal factor. One is clothing and one is activity. So clothing determines the glow value. That means the resistance that you have on your skin, how much you can lose heat from your body. Ultimately, thermal comfort, you can think it as a heat balance equation, that whatever you are generating from your body, you have to lose that heat in the environment. So clothing is an important factor where you have to see that whether you are wearing a very thick coat versus you are planning to wear a shorts and t-shirt like you are in home. And so when you are starting to design your building in the 4 categories that you have been given in your solar decathlon design exercise, you have to first determine that what is an expected level of clothing that is expected in a home versus in educational facility versus in office. And this is similarly, you have to determine what is the activity level that is going to impact your design of your building. To assess what will be the thermal comfort in the building that you are going to design, you have to first determine what will be the activity that will be carried out. So if you are going to work in an office area, you will be, many of the occupants will be sitting and reading. So that will be a glow value, that will be activity level of 1 or 1.1 MET, as you may know. And you might have a different clothing if it's a formal clothing requirements, or if you are allowing a little bit of relaxed clothing environment, clothing in the facility, you will have a different glow value to look at. Again, that clothing will also change in summer as well as winter, because in winter you will wear the warm clothes. So you need to, when you look at designing for the personal factors in thermal comfort, you look at the activity levels as well as the clothing. Now here, what's important for you while designing is that clothing and activity is highly dependent on the function of the building, as I explained before. So you will have a very little control on the designing of those 2 aspects. It's more like an input that you have to take in designing your building, that these will be the clothing level as well as the activity level in the building. And there are 4 environmental factors that you need to consider while assessing thermal comfort. Now, those 4 factors are, as you might have studied in the earlier webinars, air temperature, humidity, air velocity, and radiant temperature. Now, this is where your design of a building can have influence on how you develop different strategies for your building, so you can control the air temperature inside your building, humidity, air velocity, and radiant temperature. To simplify the air temperature and radiant temperature in buildings, there is one very simple matrix which is called operative temperature, which has a combined effect of radiant air temperature and radiant temperature on human body. So when you are starting to strategize for building, you have to think of each of these environmental factors and say, what can I do in my building so that these factors, these environmental parameters like radiant temperature, air temperature, humidity, and air velocity is maintained in the building, so you maintain thermal comfort of the occupants. So, and finally, there is a psychological aspect. So psychological aspects is not something I'm planning to cover in here in this short webinar, but it plays a very important role. So where you are, have grown up, what's your background, whether you have been grown up in a tropically acclimatized climate, or if you have grown up in a environment where you have always been exposed to air conditioning system. Depending on that, as well as several other factors, your psychological aspects play an important role in determining thermal comfort. Now, that may not be something that you have to do as part of this exercise, but as a science of thermal comfort, it's an important area where one needs to understand the psychological aspects. So I would recommend you to understand more about what are the psychological aspects, what are the adaptive measures that one can take, also that you can utilize in your building design. And using all these factors, finally, there is a comfort scale that is what is presented in thermal comfort, which goes from -3 number to 3 number. -3 is a cold sensation of a human. 0 is a neutral sensation, which is what you would ideally like to have in your building, and 3 is a hot sensation. So this is a scale where you actually want to be in the center of the scale or around the center of the scale in the comforts, thermal comfort scale. So let me talk a little bit about each of these environmental parameters and what one can do to influence in the values and how you can build it in your design strategies. So as I mentioned before, operative temperature is a very simplified matrix to quantify what humans feel. So it's a matrix which in one sentence reflects how a human feels at their skin, and it has a combined effect of air temperature and radiant temperature. As you can see on the graph on this slide, that as operative temperature increases, the comfort scale also goes from the cold to warm, cold to hot. So at 32, 33 degrees, when you have a very, very low air velocity, you have a 50% relative humidity, and you have a standard office glow and mat values, this line demonstrates that how strong of a correlation operative temperature has with comfort scale. So you would want to be in the middle of the scale around 0, between minus 0.5 to 0.5, to make your occupant comfortable. So this is where you would want to design your building to achieve. And what can you do to maintain a good, comfortable operative temperature inside your building? So a couple of strategies that I want to talk about is air leakage strategy. So air leakage strategy is where you try to control or ensure that your envelope is very, very tight. You don't have any uncontrolled leakages. So the leakages through the doors, through the cracks, or different parameter windows, is where you get a lot of leakages, and that leakages tend to make it difficult for the air conditioning system to maintain thermal comfort. That's why air leakage tightness is a very, very important design strategies that you can consider. That what if I have a business as usual air leakage of certain air change per hour, let's say 6 or 10 air change per hour. What can I do to tighten my building so my air coming from the outside and heat and moisture that comes with the air reduces, and my operative temperature inside the building is better controlled by air conditioning system. The other important strategy is a glazing and shading design. So as you might have heard from Professor Rahul in the last presentation, that you can actually use a glazing systems which are double or triple glazing systems. You can use very low U value, so you can reduce the heat gain coming from the glazing systems. You can strategically design the orientation of the glazing as well as the shading system, so the direct solar radiation falling inside your building reduces. And you can also decide that what should be the dimension of shading. So this all reduces the temperature of your envelope surfaces. So your glass temperature, wall temperatures, all temperature reduces, which reduces the radiant temperature of your building. And since radiant is one part of the operative temperature, it has a huge influence on the operative temperature of the building. So good glazing and shading design is a very important design strategy that you would like to incorporate while designing your building. Another important element is a ventilation design. So there are different strategies for ventilation that I'm going to talk a little bit later in the webinar. But in ventilation design, one needs to understand that when outside is comfortable, how one can utilize that air to provide comfortable environment inside the building. At the same time, the location of the ventilation ducts or the ventilation windows openings is a very, very important element to make sure that there is no variation or stratification of temperature inside the building. So ventilation, good ventilation design, and where you don't have a you don't have uncontrolled air coming inside the building, but have a very nicely controlled air, and that air that you treat So for example, if I'm getting a 40-degree outdoor temperature inside the building to maintain indoor air quality, I would like to condition it before it comes inside the building. So when it reaches the space, it's not creating a different temperature gradient stratification. And so it leads to better operative temperature inside your building. So these are a few strategies that one can work on to better manage operative temperature in your building. What about humidity? So humidity, as you can read here, is that when the humidity is high, then our heat loss through the evaporation of your skin significantly reduces. So high humidity is a major concern in terms of thermal comfort. Now here in humidity, it's important to not worry about the precise humidity, but more think in terms of the range of humidity you would like to maintain inside your building. And how can you maintain the humidity level inside your building? So there are several strategies for that as well. One strategy is to install vapor retarders or barriers in your envelope. So what is a vapor retarder and barriers? Vapor retarders are a material that reduces the water diffusion through that material inside your building. So you put it on the envelope surface. So water passing through that material reduces, as you can see on the image. And retarders, as the name suggests, reduces the water transmission, and barriers actually stops the water from coming inside. So depending upon what you are sizing for, how much you want to control your humidity, you actually want to use vapor retarders and barriers. When you select vapor retarders or barriers, there are several important parameters to think about. One is called PERM rating. PERM rating is where you understand that how much water transmits through the material. So you would want to select the appropriate material for your building. You want to have the location of the vapor barriers is also very important. And that depends on whether your humidity is more outside or more inside, expected to be more inside the building. And depending upon that, you need to correctly select the location of vapor barriers and retarders. If you incorrectly place the vapor barriers or retarders in your envelope systems like wall, you actually can lead to condensation. That actually can lead to condensation and mold growth. So you have to be very careful in selecting the material properties as well as the location of vapor retarders and barriers. But it's a very effective strategies. For example, aluminum is considered as a good vapor barrier. And if you don't have a joint or sealant, if you have a continuous material, then you can actually use it to reduce the moisture coming inside the building. However, when you select it, you also need to look at the other properties that we discussed in the last webinar. What is the thermal conductivity of that material? How will it increase the heat gain inside the building? So essentially you have to balance all these factors while defining your strategies, and your strategy will depend on specific building that you are designing. So first you have to determine what should be my operative temperature inside the building, what should be my humidity inside the building that I would like to maintain, and then start backwards towards the design strategy. Air leakage I have already talked about. Now just keep in mind that the water travels 100 times faster than heat. So that means that a little leakage in the envelope can actually equalize moisture contents between inside and outside, between inside environment and outside environment. While thermally you have a very little penalty, the air leakage will have a large penalty from the moisture point. So the last point strategy that you can actually consider is a latent load management. So this is where you already know that there will be some moisture coming inside the space. Now, how will you treat that? So there are air conditioning systems that has very high latent load fraction. or there are systems that are designed to specifically absorb moisture from the or water from the inside buildings. So you need to understand that if I am building in a very humid climate like Chennai, then there will be humidity that will come inside my building, and then how will I treat it? What system should I design so that I treat it efficiently and I treat it appropriately to maintain thermal comfort inside your building. So you cannot always try to use vapor barriers and air leakage as a strategy. Ultimately, latent load management of your active air conditioning systems will play an important role to maintain humidity level inside your building. Air velocity is another important parameter, and this is very, very pertinent to our context. As you can see on the slide, that elevated air speed can actually widen acceptable range of conditions, thermal conditions. What that means is that as you increase the air velocity inside your building, you can actually maintain a slightly warmer temperature and still maintain comfort. So that means if you have experienced yourself from anecdotal evidence that when you run the ceiling fan, you will feel cooler if the air conditioning systems are running. So you can actually raise the temperature set point of your air conditioning system and still feel the same comfort inside your building. The image that you are seeing here is of a computational fluid dynamics. The purpose here of this image is to just demonstrate to you that how the air movement impacts the air distribution inside the space. So you need to understand that just by putting a ceiling fan, it's not going to solve a problem. You actually have to understand where and what kind of ceiling fans to put, how much energy it consumes, what is the velocity that it produces. And with that velocity, you can refer back to a standard. For example, ASHRAE 55 2017 standard will give you a number that if you maintain certain air velocity, what is the temperature threshold that you can go to. So just to elaborate on that, you can maintain certain X velocity, and with zero velocity, you have to maintain 25 degrees operative temperature to maintain comfort, as we saw in a couple of slides ago. Now, I can actually run the fan, increase the air velocity, and achieve the same comfort at 26 degrees. Based on the standard, that's the feedback I can get. And that reduces my air conditioning consumption, as well as my ceiling fan consumption is not as large as the air conditioning system consumption. So you can incorporate this strategy in your design. So air circulation devices is a very, very important strategy that I would highly encourage you to look in your design, consider in your design. Air distribution, it's important to have the right amount of air and right amount of velocity at where the person is sitting. So it's not about just putting the ceiling fan, but you have to put at the right place. And you can also decide the window opening so that you can have some natural air ventilation where you can actually experience higher air velocity. By doing that, by doing a good windows opening design, you can actually have an elevated airspeed inside your building, and that way increase the amount of hours that you can operate your windows and decrease the amount of hours your air conditioning systems have to run. So as always, if you reduce the air conditioning system's usage, your energy consumption will reduce. So that's a very, very good strategy to consider in your design. So now I'm going to talk a little bit about an adaptive thermal comfort model. So this is a model which is talking about not a constant temperature to maintain inside your building. It's a temperature that relates with the outdoor temperature conditions or whatever meteorological parameters. So here there are two graphs you can see. On the left side, you can see that as the temperature outdoor increases, the comfort temperature where people feel comfortable and expected to maintain achieve a neutral thermal sensation slightly increases by 1 degree. However, if you look at naturally ventilated buildings and also mixed mode buildings, you will see that the temperature, which is the red dots, can actually go as high as 7 degrees. It can go from 20 to 27 degrees. So this comfort model provides immense opportunity in your design so that you don't have to maintain a constant temperature inside a building, but actually vary your temperature in a way that when outside is warm, you can maintain a slightly warmer temperature, thus saving electrical energy. So adaptive comfort model is very, very important, and historical evidences has shown that this adaptive model has worked quite effectively in buildings. I'll also talk about it in context of our building, a net zero energy building. Further, as I've been talking about, there is a energy benefits of using adaptive model. So there are two systems where we have modeled here. One is a baseline cooling system, our split DX system, a direct expansion system. And then on the second system is a low energy cooling system, which uses DX with desiccant. And you can see that by using a constant set point versus an adaptive model, there is a significant energy saving. So by just changing the set point, and you are not talking about even sizing, you are just talking about just reducing the operation hours, you can get 14 to 15% savings in energy consumption. So there is a good amount of savings that's possible by using energy adaptive model in your design. This is a building that I'm going to talk a little bit about, in a net zero energy building where I am sitting right now. And this is the place where adaptive thermal comfort model has been used in designing the building. And you can see on the right image, there are researchers sitting in the area and doing their work. And I'll talk a little bit about how their thermal comfort is. But just to give you an example how you would start designing your system, you can actually go on a tool which is on our website or any other tool where you understand which city in which you are going to build your building. And then you take that data and then expand it to understand what is the climatic characteristics of that particular location. So you can compare different cities. You can see how the comfort is in Ahmedabad versus Bangalore or versus Delhi. In this case, it's Ahmedabad and Bangalore. You can see what is the temperature conditions, and that helps you determine the thermal comfort strategies that you need to build in your building so that you can achieve thermal comfort. So that analysis led to something like this, which is where each bar shows a month from January to December and shows operating hours for every month. And you can see that in which hours of the month, how many hours of the month is expected to be warm, too hot, comfortable, cold, or too cold. And you can see that May, as expected in Ahmedabad, is going to be very, very warm. But January, February has significant number of hours, more than 50% for January, for example, and 40% for February, where you can actually utilize outside air to keep your space comfortable and maintain thermal comfort. By utilizing this strategy in the building, we have actually been able to achieve comfortable environment. So these are a couple of slides. I'll show you quickly how we have demonstrated the use of adaptive thermal comfort building model in net zero energy building. Here, there is a comfortable temperature which is in dark blue, and you can see that even at 24 to almost 29 to 30 degrees, more than 93% of the votes, and there are a significant number of votes, almost 100 to 500 votes, where people are feeling comfortable. This shows that the operative temperature has been nicely maintained. It's been effectively managed, as well as the latent loads have been effectively managed in the net zero energy building. Now, understanding the comfort aspect, let's look at the temperature aspects. So if you look at the temperature bar and the initial graph where I have talked about different models, you can see that all the temperatures which are red dots, these red dots are hourly measured temperature inside the buildings, are falling right on the upper band of where person feels comfortable. So this is very close to what the adaptive thermal comfort model for India says, IMEC says, and it's proven by the earlier slide that the people are feeling comfortable and the temperatures are also well controlled. So this is what you would like to achieve in your building when you start designing for thermal comfort. And this is when you run a simulation or you do the exercises, this is where you would like to see and at the end of your analysis, what your temperatures are versus what your original goals of adaptive thermal comfort model is. With that, Yashima, you would like to run a poll now?
Sure. All right, everyone, we will have a poll right now. The question is, so I'm launching the question. The question is, why do you want to design a building as per an adaptive thermal comfort model? The three options are to achieve energy savings. That's the first option. The second is to achieve thermal comfort. And the third is both A and B. We'll wait for another 7 to 8 seconds and we'll end the poll after that. Right, so in 3, 2, and 1, and I'll end the poll now. So Dr. Yash, here are the results. So 94% say both A and B, whereas we have 3% each for option A as well as option B.
Excellent. I think that's an excellent result, and the answer is both A and B. I'm very happy that 238 people are paying attention to what being talked about. So you want to, the other 3%, 6% are not wrong. You want to achieve energy savings, but at the same time, you also want to achieve thermal comfort. So actually, the adaptive thermal comfort model is a good strategy to design and achieve both thermal comfort as well as energy savings. Okay, moving on to the next topic, I'll talk a little bit about the ventilation strategies. So ventilation is essentially a flow of outdoor air that comes inside the, from outside air, outside space to indoor space. And it has primarily two objectives: to improve the indoor air quality and to achieve thermal comfort. So you can utilize when outside is comfortable, you can make, you can operate this strategy, you can utilize this strategy to achieve thermal comfort in the space. And when outside is a good quality air, or if you have a more pollutants inside than outside, and I'll talk a little bit more about that, you can actually, that's a necessary requirement to improve indoor air quality inside building. And there are different ventilation strategies one can use. One is a natural ventilation. So natural ventilation is where you have an opening such as windows or a specific purposely provided openings which you can open to get natural air from the outside. So like in a bedroom at night, it's comfortable, it's nice, it's raining, you open the window, then you start getting a natural ventilation inside your building. Mechanical ventilation is where you cannot get sufficient quantity of air inside your building through natural ventilation. You go to a mechanical ventilation mode. In mechanical ventilation, essentially you have a fan connected to the duct, which brings a controlled amount of air inside your building to maintain indoor air quality and thermal comfort. What it helps, mechanical system is required when you need a large quantity of air and you don't want to depend on a certain outdoor parameters. For example, if you open the window, but outside is not comfortable, or the gradient, temperature gradient is not large enough, you will not get a lot of natural ventilation. Or if your air velocity outside or the wind speed is not sufficient, you will not get good sufficient quantity. You may or may not get sufficient quantity of air. But with mechanical ventilation, you know what the fan speed is, you know what the duct size is, so you can confidently say that you are forcing that much quantity of outdoor air inside your building. And it also gives you opportunity to send that ventilation air inside the buildings in the deeper side part of the building. So you don't have to have adjacent to be is have a space or zone adjacent to envelope. You can actually have a space inside and still take an advantage of ventilation, air for thermal comfort, and you would be needing the air for indoor air quality. And then there is a very interesting third strategy, which is a hybrid or mixed mode ventilation strategy. I would really encourage you to look at that strategy while you design your building, where you have a method of switching between the natural and mechanical ventilation mode, or a natural or mechanical ventilation mode that links with air conditioning system. So you can actually try to see that when outside is comfortable, let's use the best natural ventilation mode. So you save energy. But when outside is extreme and you still need to maintain indoor air quality, you switch to a mechanical ventilation mode. So that's a mixed mode ventilation strategy. That's a strategy that we have used in net zero energy building that I will demonstrate a little bit later. And there are different kinds of mixed mode ventilation strategies. One is a concurrent strategy. So in a concurrent strategy, you actually have a natural ventilation air coming already inside and at the same through the opening, but at the same time, you are also operating the air conditioning system. That's a very rarely used strategy, and it's only beneficial in certain scenario where the stratification is less or the temperature gradient is less. Very commonly used strategy is a changeover mixed mode strategy. So in a changeover, what happens is that when you have a comfortable outside air, you open the windows like in a bedroom while you are sleeping, and then when you close it in the night when it's hot, you start the AC. So it's a changing over between the different operation modes between natural ventilation and mechanical or air conditioning mode. The third is a combination, is a zoned mixed mode ventilation, in which certain part of your space is on natural ventilation. For example, your drawing rooms, which may not have air conditioning systems, but a bedroom may have a AC where you can actually either work on a changeover mode or you can work in an air conditioned mode throughout. So you can zone your building depending upon whether if it's an educational facilities, you might want to have a zoned design in your building in mixed mode ventilation. So you can utilize in parallel, you don't have to directly go to air conditioning modes in all for all the spaces. You can actually start zoning it to make it more effective. It also helps you when you have certain peripheral zones which has less load, and then you can actually operate it to maintain the comfortable environment, while indoor zones where you have a lot of load, for example, a lot of occupants are sitting there, or if you have a facility where medical care is required, for example, a resilient building that you are going to look into, then you may have to depend on air conditioning system to maintain thermal comfort. So this is a net zero energy building, and you can see on the left side, on the top part is what we have, the ceiling, the fans that draws the mechanical ventilation air inside the building. At the same time, you see on the right side are the windows, that one image, right side image, where you can actually open the windows and get natural ventilation. So we have designed our first and second floor of the building to be a mixed mode building, while in the basement, we have maintained a fully air conditioning mode. However, the air conditioning system can use through the system a fan free cooling. That means when outside is comfortable, it actually uses free cooling to provide comfortable environment inside the space. So this is what the strategy is. When outside is comfortable, you open the windows. When it's hot outdoor environment, you close the windows and you operate the air conditioning systems, active air conditioning system. So how can one go about designing this net zero ventilation mode? So you first, like I said, do a climate analysis. Here you look at each month and operating hours like we have done. And then you go to something on the right side, which is a pie chart. So you understand that when do I have to run heating? When do I have to run ventilation? When do I have to run cooling? How much cooling do I need? Do I need to do a cooling as well as remove water, moisture from the space? Based on that pie chart, you can decide for each space, that how do I strategize my ventilation strategy, whether I go on a zone or a concurrent or changeover mixed mode strategy. So for this particular building, this is a simple table which shows that we have done the analysis to say that when we can keep the windows open and closed for a month. So we have taken a typical temperature of a particular month in the morning, afternoon, and evening, and said, what can we do to achieve comfort? So you can see in January, February, afternoon and evening, we can open windows and we don't have to use air conditioning system. But in the March onwards, April onwards, it actually starts getting really warm, and then we have to completely depend on the air conditioning systems to maintain comfort inside the building. Do you want to go to the next poll, Yashima?
Sure. All right, everyone, we are going to launch the next poll now. And the question is, are you planning to use mixed mode ventilation in your design? Yes, no, or you are still thinking about it, so maybe. All right, everyone, we will be ending the poll in 3, 2, and 1. Right, so Dr. Yash, here are the results. So gladly 60% say yes, whereas 37% are on maybe and 4% say no.
Interesting. So that's a very good to hear that 60% is considering. The 37% people who are thinking, I would strongly encourage you to consider mixed mode design in your building, especially even if you have to do a zone. Also, participants who are talking about no, maybe you can think about what areas of your building where you can actually think about having a mixed mode ventilation and reduce the energy consumption of your building. Thank you, Yashima.
Yep, thank you.
So going to the next topic, I'm going to talk a little bit about the indoor air quality. Again, I'm going to keep it very, very brief, mainly because it's a vast area of research, vast area of study that needs to happen, that all of you should take on from in your future. However, for the aspects I'm going to only talk about, which is pertinent to the Solar Decathlon India work that you are doing right now. So you can divide the indoor air quality in mainly 6 parts. You can talk about carbon dioxide, which is one of the important parameters that you should think about in your design. There are various kind of airborne particles. You must have heard about one of them as particulate matter, PM. It's a lot in news nowadays. And there are 2 commonly known metrics are PM 2.5 and PM 10. You have ozone that you have to also measure inside your building. There are odors that you need to avoid. Other VOCs and indoor formaldehyde. These are the most common measures of achieving and maintaining and measuring indoor air quality. In particularly for this exercise, I'm going to talk about 2 specific measures or metrics. One is a carbon dioxide level and one is particulate matter levels inside your buildings, and how you can go about designing that in your building. So let's talk about first the carbon dioxide level. So studies have shown extensively that a high carbon dioxide levels affect health, as occupant health, as well as performance. And when you say performance, that means if you're talking about offices, which is one of your 4 buildings, your performance of your occupants significantly reduces if you go above a certain level, as you can see in the table. So it's a very, very important parameter to look at. One of the main source of carbon dioxide levels is occupants. So how do you design your building to maintain carbon dioxide levels? you actually need to do two things. You need to have a very good controlled ventilation. Outside level in the outdoor space for carbon dioxide is roughly 250 to 400 parts per million. If there is a little bit more polluted city, then you might have slightly higher ppm, like 450 ppm as well. But most environments would have 250 to 400, 400 being the most common number. So if you have a high parts per million or high concentration of carbon dioxide inside the space, what do you do? How do you dilute it? Well, the easiest way is to get air from outside and throw the air from inside the building to outside. So once you mix it, it dilutes and your level inside the space goes down. And if you're throwing it out, again, whatever you are producing is going into the environment. And environment has tremendous capabilities to manage the carbon dioxide levels. So you can do a very good ventilation, and actually your carbon dioxide level inside your building is one of a good metrics for you to assess in any building whether how good your ventilation system is. But it's not only sufficient to do a ventilation, you also need to do your design well. So that means you need to know where your occupants will be, how much, what will be the concentration of occupants, what will be the level of activity that they have. So as you have a higher activity level, your carbon dioxide coming from occupants increases the amount of carbon dioxide. So you need to account for that in your design. First, understand and do a balance of carbon dioxide level, saying that if I'm producing this much, if I have 10 occupants, this is what I'm producing. And then this is the amount of outside air that I need to maintain a good carbon dioxide level inside the building. And what would be a good carbon dioxide level? Well, 400 is ideal if you are in an outdoor space or fully connected to outdoors. But there are other disadvantages of having a lot of connection with outside air. One is the heat and moisture, as I had talked in earlier slides. But others is also particulate matter, which I'll talk about in the next slide. So you need to again balance. You need to see how much is sufficient to maintain indoor this carbon dioxide level. 400 to 1000 ppm is a typical level that you see in a building. If you go about 1000, you need to start worrying. It's still if you have a sporadic value about 1000 for 15 minutes or 10 minutes, it's not something that is worrisome. But it does show that there is a poor outdoor air circulation or a lot more occupant density than design. And that with extensive exposure leads to certain symptoms and health problems of occupants. However, if you are going about 2000, even 5000 above, you really need to start thinking how you can increase the ventilation rate, because that leads to poor concentration, nausea, heart rate, and many other health symptoms that you would definitely want to avoid. So this becomes your benchmark to which you need to design your building. So 400 to 1000 is what you should take as a metric and do a back calculation to calculate the amount of ventilation air that you need. Now talking about particulate matter. So high PM level also is a very, very dangerous. It goes in our lungs and once it goes in our breathing, and a very, very small particles, that's why we talk about PM 2.5, can lead to a very serious health hazard. So this is a very important parameter to look at. Now, usually inside the building, there are no sources that generate, usually I'm saying, no sources that generate particulate matter. So usually that comes from the outside. So you must have seen a lot of studies in how the PM levels are in Delhi, in Ahmedabad, and different parts of India due to many factors. Then you need to actually, if you get more ventilation to reduce the CO2 level, again your PM level, particulate matter level inside the building increases. So then that becomes another health hazard. So you need to think about increasing ventilation for carbon dioxide, but then have a strategy. So whatever you are getting from outside is filtered. So you need to have a good filtering system as part of your air conditioning system design, so that inside PM level stays within the limit. And this limit varies, so I'm not mentioning the specific limit, but what I have mentioned in the table here is a filtration efficiency. So when you design your air conditioning systems to maintain indoor air quality, you have to first decide what is my target, what is the level that I want, what is an outdoor PM that I see in a specific city that I'm going to build my house or educational facility, and then decide a filtering system that can take care of it and that can trap the particles. So MERV rating is one of the rating system which defines the efficiency of filters. So you can see 1 to 4 is typically used in buildings, and that has 20% efficiency throughout and trapping the particles. But if you want to be more efficient, you want to go to a MERV 8 or MERV 13. However, when you go and increase the MERV rating, the pressure drop across the filter increases. So your power required for your fan further increases. So because of that, you need to be balancing what is the indoor air quality is. At the same time, what is the increased power consumption or power penalty for the filtration that you need to actually think about in your building. So all these factors, as well as the cost, because you have periodically you have to replace the filter. So you need to consider all these factors while maintaining and designing your indoor air quality in your buildings. Again, it depends on what your building application is, what its usage is, what is the target. For example, if you want to design for a health facility, which could be a part of your resilient building, then you have to actually have a very good filtration system. If you are going to talk about a home, then you may have a slightly lesser MERV rating. Higher the better, there is no question on that. But you need to balance that out with the energy consumption. So you need to appropriately design your filtration system or air cleaning strategy, as I've noted here, to maintain the particulate matter in the building. So with that, I know I took a little bit more time, but I hope that was helpful. And Yashima, do you want to run the last poll?
Yep, sure. All right, everyone has the last poll for today, and we will be taking questions after that. So the question here is, the poll question is, why should we have adequate ventilation in the building? First, to maintain carbon dioxide levels inside the building. The second option is to maintain PM level inside the building. And the third option is both A and B. And we'll end the poll in 3, 2, and 1. All right, Dr. Yash, here are the results. So 83% say both A and B, whereas 10% say to maintain the carbon dioxide levels and 7% say to maintain the PM level.
Excellent. I think this was a little tricky question. That's why I had kept it in the last, so that it could lead to a further discussions. But just to be clear, when you increase the ventilation inside the building, you actually maintain a good carbon dioxide level, because carbon dioxide source is inside and outside is a 400 parts per ppm level, so it's a lower level. And so when you mix it, you dilute the inside carbon dioxide level and you bring it down and bring it to the level that you want. For PM level, it's actually contrary, because you would, since the source, if it's a polluted city or whatever that factor is, more outside air you bring, you are going to increase the PM level inside your building. So it's actually an outside air could actually work contrary to what your design intentions are. And so at that time, because you have to get more outdoor air for carbon dioxide levels and to maintain other IAQ parameters, which I have not talked about here, you actually then have to do a filtration. So from, let's say strictly, if I have no occupants or one occupant with a very little CO2 level rise, I can reduce my ventilation rate inside the building and thus better maintain PM level? So the answer, in my opinion, is A, but it's a tricky question because adequate ventilation is very important, but ventilation could lead to a negative impact on the PM level inside the building.
Thank you, Dr. Yash. With all that, I'm sure our participants should definitely have a better understanding of thermal comfort, indoor air quality, and ventilation. And let's take some questions now. So the first question is, for indoor environment quality, it is mentioned in the competition guide to refer to the WHO standards for PM 2.5 and PM 10. Can you please explain about it?
So I can explain about PM 2.5 and PM 10.
Yes.
But you have to explain about the competition part.
Sure.
So essentially what those numbers mean is the size of the micron of the particles that we are talking about. So when there is certain pollutants, you want to understand that what kind of pollutants are there and what is the size of those pollutants. And depending upon different size, you want to have different filtration efficiency, different strategy, right? Like I mentioned. So for example, for MERV 8, it is very effective for PM10 to trap that particles, but may not be very effective for 1 to 3 microns. And so depending upon the level that you want, if you want to maintain PM 2.5, which is essentially referring to a certain size of particles, you need to use a different strategy. And they both have different health impacts. So smaller the particles can have a larger impact on our health hazards. And so in certain settings, for example, in the hospital settings, you would actually need to cater to PM 2.5 as well as 10. In certain settings, you can actually focus on PM 10 and then assume that that same efficiency or certain amount of efficiency is sufficient. You also need to understand what is an outdoor PM 2.5 and outdoor PM 10 levels so that you can appropriately design your strategy. I hope that's clear from the application point of view.
Yes.
Shima.
Yeah. And from the competition side, I would request Prasad to take that up. Prasad?
Sure. Am I audible?
Yes.
Yeah. So the WHO has certain standards for maintaining PM 2.5 and PM 10, which are considered, healthy or hazardous, etc. You need to look up the standards and find out what those levels are. And what we are requiring you to do is to pay attention to those standards, because you are likely to be jumping into making a net zero energy building by using naturally ventilated natural ventilation strategies, say, when the temperatures are comfortable. So for example, in Delhi, if your project is in Delhi or northern India, you might decide, oh, it's October, November, the temperatures are pleasant, I'm going to open my windows. But if the PM 2.5 levels or the PM 10 levels are very high, then you have to pay attention to what quality of air is coming into the building. And that's something that may change the way you design your ventilation strategy. So that's kind of the thinking that you need to do when we say maintain WHO levels of air inside your building. Yash, do you want to add anything to that?
No, I think that's great. Just to talk about, how one can go about it is, you find out on your city, what is the PM 2.5, PM 10. You do a thermal analysis in saying when it's comfortable to bring that air, let's say for natural ventilation. And then you put that together to come up with the filtration, which is the last, is that, okay, I cannot do natural ventilation because it's very bad, polluted air outside. Then you start using, say, okay, I will use mechanical ventilation with filters so that I can filter that out. So that's how I would go about designing the strategy as per the WHO guideline.
Thank you, Prasad. Thank you, Dr. Yash. Next question is, so is the operative temperature scale universal, or does it depend on the topography or climate of that area?
Operative temperature, let me just understand that question a bit more. So the formula of operative temperature, when it accounts for the air temperature and the radiant temperature, remains constant. That means if I know an air temperature and I know a radiant temperature, as well as I know the velocity, I can calculate the operative temperature of a person. Essentially, it's a matrix of how the person feels. Now, if you are talking about let me go to that slide. If you are talking about adaptive thermal comfort model and the X scale in which the operative temperature is defined, I think that's what you are referring to. Here, we do not talk about operative temperature. Here we talk about monthly outdoor temperature and indoor comfort temperature, which is again an operative temperature. But no, the topography will not change the operative temperature. It will just change based on what your strategies are. The formula remains constant, and it won't change based on different cities or different locations.
Right. Thank you. Let's take the next question. How can fresh air be incorporated if split air conditioners are deployed in a room?
That's a very good question and a tricky question, because typically what we see in our homes, the split air conditioning systems does not have ventilation air. So it's only working on the recirculated air and trying to cool the space. So there are several strategies to do that. And one is, if you are talking about a home, you can actually have a separate ventilation air that comes inside the same space to maintain, indoor air quality. Or in the inlet of the return, you can actually design a system where you can get the fresh air inside your connected to the return air of the split AC. But saying that, it's easier said than done, because it's not typically what the split systems are designed for. It cannot handle the ducting very well, so you cannot directly connect a duct because of the pressure drop that it adds in the fan. So you would want to put either the vent very close to the unit, or you will have to improvise on how you design your ventilation system with its own fan and own filtration system.
Right. Thank you, sir. Next question is, so do we completely seal off and allow no air leakage, or is some infiltration actually good in order to have some fresh air exchange indoors, although at the risk of increasing the cooling load?
So what is the difference between infiltration and ventilation? Is that the infiltration or exfiltration is uncontrolled ventilation inside the building. So ideal world, you would want to seal it, because you cannot measure how much you are getting. You cannot control it. You would rather have either a purposely provided opening where you know and you can control the amount of outdoor air coming in than infiltration. However, in the real world, it's impossible to completely seal off the building. It would be prudent, in my opinion, is to minimize the infiltration, so you can remove the uncontrolled air coming in and go towards controlled air. It could be either natural ventilation or mechanical ventilation, depending upon how your design is.
Thank you, sir. Next question. How to manage inside humidity through humidity barriers along with proper ventilation inside the buildings?
So you have to keep in mind, so let me go in that slide here. So there are several paths of humidity coming inside the building, right? One is through the envelope where you can add barriers or retarders. So you can reduce the water diffusion through the material, envelope material. However, as I said, there will be air leakages. It's impossible to go below certain limit. It becomes more and more challenging as you have a tighter and tighter envelope. So there will be some leakage in moisture that comes inside through the air leakage or through ventilation. But when you provide a ventilation, which is a control, you can take care of humidity before it comes inside the space. So actually you have an air conditioning system, or if you have a fan with some cooling system, you can remove that moisture before it comes inside the space. So the impact inside the space in humidity is very, very less. So that is where the latent load management comes into the picture. And latent load could be treating it inside the duct, or it could also be after it comes inside the building, how do you extract it out from the building? So that's the way to design it. But keep in mind, when you do a barrier design, you need to be very good to ensure that there is no condensation on the other side of the barrier. Because if you have placed in the wrong direction, you will lead to condensation on the other side. So on one side, you are blocking the moisture. Similarly, when inside is very, very moist, you are not allowing that moisture to go outside. So there is a possibility of condensation and mold growth. So you have to be very careful. And that's why you don't see very often vapor retarders and barriers used in India. However, with proper knowledge, I think it is definitely a strategy one should consider in that design.
Thank you, sir. Next question. So on slide 25, how do we quantify the amount of this CO2, PM, odor, etc.?
Slide 25 is just talking about what are the matrices. Slide 26, where I talk about quantifying it.
Yeah, I think that's what the attendee also was asking. I think it's about the numbers that you showed.
Okay. So how do we calculate? I'm assuming the question is that how do we go about knowing what is the parts per million? So ppm stands for parts per million, right? So you know what is outside air and what is an inside air when the occupant. So there are formulas given in standard, either a rule of thumb or a more precise formula based on activity level, that how much carbon dioxide level is emitted inside the space. So by that, I mean is that if you know there are 10 or 20 or 30 people inside a space, you know what will be the CO2 level inside. You can add that value in, and that I cannot give those numbers because it depends on activity level and lots of other factors as well. You know, body weight, and so there are other factors to consider. So based on that, you know what the carbon dioxide level is produced. That's your source, right? And then it's a simple mixed heat balance equation. It's, you know, AX plus BY is equal to Z. It's simple saying that, you know, if I get 100 quantity of air with 400 CFM and I have 100 quantity of air with 800 ppm inside, then combined is going to be 600 parts per million. It's a common addition. To convert the quantity into parts per million, you have to use a formula that is related to volume. What is the volume of the space, so that you know what's the volume of the air and what fraction of that air is carbon dioxide. And then you do a simple mixing equation to come up with that. This is the ventilation rate I need to maintain 600, 700, 800 or 1000 ppm or below 1000 ppm inside the building.
Thank you, sir. Next question is, so in a city like Delhi, where the AQI reaches beyond 700, how do you maintain an AQI of around 100 indoors, considering that we are using mixed mode ventilation and therefore there is going to be an influx of particulate matter?
So when you talk about AQI, you know that it's varying throughout the year, right? So what you are talking about is peak AQI, and at that time you use good filtration system to maintain your indoor air quality. However, even though the outside is comfortable but it's polluted, you would not want to use natural ventilation without filtration to bring that air inside the space. So the key is, like we have talked earlier, is to balance, is that you look at what is the AQI level, but just don't go on the peak level. There are lots of time in the year when AQI is not that bad. For example, in the night time or versus the daytime, you will see, if you see the graphs, there are different times of the day, different times of the year, the AQI changes. So when you make a decision of natural ventilation, it has to be based on two parameters: the temperature conditions, humidity conditions, thermal conditions, as well as the indoor and the air quality consideration. When you find both the favorable condition, then only you can use unfiltered ventilation. When it is not there, you can always use a little bit more energy of fan, but still utilize that air and filter out the air and maintain the indoor air quality. So that to me would be a suitable strategy to use for a city like Delhi.
Thank you. Next question. So, which tool has been used to determine the comfort hours of the cities?
It's a very simple formula. Actually, you look at the comfort band. So let me just give you an example very quickly. It looks difficult, but it's not at all difficult. So let me go back there. Yeah. So here is what, here is what my temperature is, right? So the tool, first let me answer you, the tool, and then I'll talk about methodology. So we have tools on our research center's website, as well as I'm sure Solar Decathlon India will also have tools where you can go and actually calculate that what is the thermal comfort, what is the expected climate conditions, and when you will be able to utilize favorable conditions. And those are simple Excel-based tools or a simple online tools where you can fit the information, which is already a data of climatic data of Ahmedabad, which will extract out something like this there directly to you. But if you want to know in more detail, it's a simple method, is that you determine what is a comfortable temperature based on the graph like this. On the right side, you can see this graph tells you what is a comfortable temperature here. You see what is an outdoor condition at that point, and based on that you determine that does it fall under the cold or warm or that. It's just a matter of identifying my prevalent conditions versus what my comfort conditions are and comparing them. There are other factors. I'm not trying to simplify this, but it's a simple in principle. But then you have to talk about what is the internal load. You have to talk about what are the building parameters. What is thermal mass of the building. All that parameters you need to look at. But in simplistically, the climatic analysis is just comparing these two parameters.
Right. Thank you, sir. Next question. Can we introduce a TFA as a separate unit for fresh air?
I mean, there are two answers to it. One is as part of the competition. You have to, I'll ask, Yashima or Prasad to answer that. But treated supply air or TSA or different kinds of, systems could be definitely one of the strategies. You can use a dedicated outdoor air system. You can provide a treated system. Essentially that's what I was talking about when you say you get outside air inside the building, treat it before it comes inside the space and provide a comfortable air. That's one strategy that definitely can be used and has been found to be very effective. You can also build this as part of your air handling unit or system design, where the fresh air does not directly come into the space, but goes to the air conditioning systems, and along with the cooling that it provides, it also provides the cooling for the fresh air, or treats the air before it comes in the space. So you can use different approaches. You can have a direct ventilation, you can have a TSA or DOAS, dedicated outdoor air system, or you can integrate as part of your air handling unit or your HVAC system design. Depending upon your building, that strategy would vary. For example, if it's a home, you wouldn't want to have, you won't have an extensive HVAC system, so you would need something like TSA or just a fan with a filtration system. If you are going to talk about resilient facilities, then you need to you cannot bring air directly into the space. You have to go through air conditioning system, especially if you are talking about health facilities. So depending upon your application, the answer would change whether you can use it or not. Whether competition allows or not, I think you will have to, Yashima or Prasad, you will have to answer that question.
Yeah, so as long as you are able to justify the need of installing a TFA or a DOS system, as Sir mentioned, I mean, the competition does not restrict you from doing it. Yeah, and Prasad, would you like to add anything?
No, that's the right answer, Yashima. You can use any system that you want.
Yeah. Okay. Moving forward, next question, sir, is how can we check the CO2 level or PM level while designing? Is there any particular software through which we can work on this simulation?
That's a good question. In fact, I was thinking, and one of my colleagues also suggested me to talk about a measurement as part of the presentation. So while designing, you don't know what your carbon dioxide and what your PM levels will be, but you will have to rely on calculations like you do for air conditioning systems, right? Before you design your building, you need to decide the capacity of your cooling system. You cannot say that, okay, I'll build a building and then I'll decide what my cooling system will be. So there are good engineering calculations that are provided that can actually be used to calculate fairly accurately the carbon dioxide level as well as PM levels. In terms of tools, there are simplistic tools available online. I'm not sure if Solar Decathlon has any specific tools that they have recommended. There are energy simulation tools, extensive energy simulation tools, which also provides you the carbon dioxide and PM calculations or the results. But I would say it's a simple calculation. So there are many tools available where you can quickly know the air ventilation rate, and based on that, what would be the expected carbon dioxide level. It's just a, mass balance is all that it requires you to do for your building. Do you have any tool that you've recommended, Yashima and Prasad, for the indoor air quality?
Yeah, I'd like Prasad to take that up. I'm not aware if we have.
No, we have only talked about calculations for ventilation quantities or ventilation rates. We have not provided any tools. So Yash, I think it would be good if, as part of the written Q&A, we can provide them a list of tools for specifically for air quality stuff.
Absolutely. Okay, we will do that.
Yep. Thank you, sir. Thank you, Prasad. Next question is, so if we are using radiant cooling along with mixed outside air ventilation, will that be efficient? That's the first part of the question. Second, how do we cool or heat the outside air? That's the second part to the question.
I can answer first. I think we should probably understand a little bit about the second question. The first question is whether the radiant cooling along with the mixed mode, would that be effective or not? Now, here I would like to just elaborate a little bit more. If we are talking about concurrent operation, that means radiant system is also working and ventilation is also operational, natural ventilation, then it becomes very tricky. It's still doable in certain moderate climate. There is an energy benefit to it. but many climates do not have that benefit, especially when you are designing a radiant system. You need to manage the latent load or the moisture. Otherwise, the panel, which is colder than the air, tends to have a condensation, and then water drops inside your building. So because of that, the radiant system, when you are using, you can use ventilation up to certain outdoor threshold criteria. And the energy benefit in typical Indian climates is very questionable, to be honest. But you can design it in a way that it's completely fine to have a natural radiant system as part of your mixed mode strategy when you switch to air conditioned mode. So for this building, a net zero energy building where I'm sitting, we actually have a radiant cooling system as part of the mixed mode ventilation strategy, but it's only operated when the windows are off and the moisture level is within a range. So you have to be careful on designing that. So I think, but whether how efficient that will be, what will be the energy benefit, it depends on a lot of factors for me to answer in a generic way, a number or percentages. Second question, I'm not sure if I completely got that. How can you heat or cool? Can you elaborate if you understood that a little bit, Yashima? You are on mute.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, even I'm not sure what does that mean exactly. So I think, so this question was asked by Abhishek, and if you could write a little bit more, and I'll take that question up again in some time. Moving ahead, next question. How to know the exact weather condition of a place when we don't get the EPW file for that place, or how do we find it?
That's a very, very tricky question. So ideally, you would want the weather data of the same file. There have been some studies and research have been done. One of that is a surrogate city tool. Which is where you do not have an EPW file or weather data file of a specific city. You go back and then you find an equivalent city using some formulas and algorithms to determine that this is the closest match to what I have in terms of the weather data. Now, it does not have to be geographically close. There are many factors that affect it. So what I would direct you to do in that specific scenario is look for tools like this, which will help you identify the closest city in terms of climate that you can take for your analysis, and then use it for all your simulations and calculations. In terms of how it aligns with the principles of the solar decathlon in India, maybe Prasad, you can elaborate on that if that's acceptable method to the competition.
Yeah, so if you're not able to find a weather file, an EPW file for the city that you're designing for, or anything that is close by, I suggest that you write to us and tell us what your location is and what the difficulty is, and we'll see if we can help you with getting to the right answer. Okay.
That makes it easy for the participants. They don't have to find the answer.
Yeah. Thank you, Prasad. Thank you, sir. Next question. Can indoor plantscaping make a significant difference in the carbon dioxide levels such that they have to or can be considered while planning ventilation?
That's a good question. There have been studies indicating that it's an effective strategy, while there have been studies which also indicated that it's not a very reliable strategy. However, in my opinion, and this is my personal opinion, is that the verdict is yet to be known, because there are times when it absorbs as well as there are times when it releases carbon dioxide. And so how do we balance that, and how the measurements have been done, how accurately that we can rely on that as a strategy, I'm not sure. And I personally don't feel I am, expert enough to comment or provide guidance on this specific topic. But it has been used by several buildings, and has a mixed, in general, I would say, if I make a neutral opinion, it has a mixed review as a strategy.
Right. Thank you, sir. Next question. Is size the only criteria to qualify PM?
I'm not sure I understand the question. It may be pertinent to the competition, but if it's not pertinent to competition, well, PM levels depends on volume, because how much air you're bringing depends on the volume, and the outdoor PM levels as well. So it's a heat balance or mass flow equations that you have to use. I'm not sure if I completely understand when you say the size is the only parameter. You would want to maintain it even for the smallest of the spaces to the largest of the spaces, because indoor air quality is important, right? For everybody, whether you are sitting alone, you would still want to breathe good indoor air quality, air with good indoor air quality. But in terms of competition, I'm not sure if you have given a size limitations, Prasad, that beyond which you have to do a strategy. If so, just clarify that.
No, I think we have not given that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Moving forward, next question, sir. Are there any other factors that reduce the PM level indoors?
As far as my knowledge, and I don't consider myself an indoor air quality expert, I think filtration is one of the most effective strategies to maintain PM level. I am not aware of, there are some other, innovative technologies that can be used to maintain the PM level. For filtration, it's still a filtration, whether you do different kinds of filtration or treating of air, whether it's mechanical treating like the filtration with the air passing through it, or through some technology, it's still treating the air to maintain the PM level. I am not sure of if that answers your question, but there are, if you are referring to technologies and newer technologies that can also capture the particles, they are available, and there have been some research that's done on that as well.
Right. So we are at 5:31 right now. I'll just take a couple of more questions, sir, and then then we'll end the webinar for today. Next question: how to control indoor qualities if we consider to merge the spatial configuration with the outdoors?
If we merge, well, that's where you have to decide what ventilation strategies is effective from your spatial and your functional characters and your utility of the space. So if you have a space which is just adjacent to envelope, and you have a good quality air, which is meets both the indoor air quality and comfort criteria, you would want to use openings probably, and if it's an indoor space, then you would need to use the mechanical ventilation. There are some natural ventilation strategies assisted by a duct or something, which can actually filter out the air and drop the particles on the pathway of the air. That strategy can also be used, for example, if you have a whole duct where the air moves through, the natural ventilation air moves through before coming inside the space, and because of the design of that, certain particles drop out. and you can get some filtration. That's another strategy that you can use for spatial config, to take advantage of providing ventilation to different spatial configuration of buildings. I'm not sure if I'm completely answering that question, but that's all I can think of right now.
Thank you, sir. And one last question for today. For CO2 level reduction, can we use specifically designed bricks which absorb CO2? Can you suggest any advanced material for the same?
I don't know of any material that can absorb and then continue to hold it. There are materials you can absorb it, but then it has to release as well, right? And it has to transmit. So very honestly, I am not aware of any brick that can hold the carbon dioxide level. It may be a limitation of my knowledge, but if it is there, I think you can see how the characteristics of that material is in absorbing and keeping it there, holding there, as long as the whole cycle is finished in terms of absorbing and releasing. Because any material that absorbs it, at some point it's saturation, then it has to release it for any gases. So that's my very generic answer, but I don't think I know enough to be able to answer that question.
Right. Thank you, sir. I think this was a very informative session. The Q&A was very helpful too, and I hope that our participants can make the best use of the knowledge and practices you have shared today. In addition, I would also like to thank the Department of Science and Technology and the Ministry of New and Renewable Energy and all our sponsors and affiliates for their support. Thank you everyone once again for participating. Again, this is a reminder that your first deliverable for Solar Decathlon India is due on October 12th, which is the coming Monday. And as I already mentioned, team leaders will submit the deliverable reports on the same learning platform where you view the learning modules each week. Tomorrow, we will send an email to the team leaders about the details for their submission. Remember, we will not accept submissions after 5 p.m. on Monday. And with that, we wish you the very best for the upcoming submission, and we will see you next week.